Let's look at the rest of the type of problems now. So the next thing that we're going to look at is problems that are application problems. So if I get an application problem like this, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use my graphing calculator to kind of go through and solve this. So I'm going to go into here and I'm just going to plug in my negative 16 x squared plus 48 x plus 160. Then I'm just going to graph this thing. And we can see that it's too big for my window. So I'm going to go to my window, and instead of having my x max be 100, I'm going to make it 200. See if that goes up tall enough. Yep, and there we go. Now I'll kind of trace this to figure out my information. So I want to figure out my max time and my max height, and that's going to be around, it looks like 1.5 and 195. If I wanted to get a closer approximation, I just go second calculate. I go to max. I'd hit that on the left bound. Go over to the right side, hit that, hit enter. And so yeah, it was my max time is 1.5 and my max height is 196. So 1.5 and 196. Let's figure out how far it was away from the ground, or how long it took to hit the ground. I'm going to make sure that I have the ground time in there, which the ground, it should be 0 because the ground isn't going to be any height. I'm going to go over here and trace over here. So it's going to be, now I'm going to hit second calculate, and this time I'm going to find where it intersects. So it's going to intersect somewhere between these two curves, and that point is at 5. So that's how you do any of the application problems. You just basically plug it in your graphing calculator and find the 3 points that you, or the 2 points that you want. One point is up here where it's max height, and the other point is down here where it hits the ground. Let's do another problem. Okay, now we're going to factor. There's 2 types of factoring that we really need to worry about. Factoring number 1 is where they give us 2 things, like if they gave us the case of 4x squared minus 81. Again, if you remember before, we call this actually a difference of squares because these things are squares, and we want to find what will multiply and add to get me 0. And this case is really, really easy because if I go 2x minus 9 and 2x plus 9, well, negative 9 plus 9 gives me 0 for my middle number, and all this multiplication works out. So if they give you 2 terms with an a value in front, you basically try to make all these numbers the same, with one side being positive and one side being negative. Let's try another. Okay, if you remember this type, this is the type where we can't divide anything out because this number doesn't divide everything, and now we have 3 terms. So it's always easier if this thing had 4 terms. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this first number and this last number and multiply them together. That's going to give us 12. Then we're going to think what multiplies together to give us 12 and adds together to give us negative 8. The numbers for that would be negative 6 and negative 2. So now we'll just replace. So we'll have 3x squared minus 6x minus 2x plus 4. It's always easier to factor 4 things than 3 things because you can cut it straight down the middle. And when you cut it straight down the middle, you factor this first part. And what would factor out of this first part would be a 3 and an x, leaving you with x minus 2. And what would factor out of the second part would be a negative 2, leaving you with an x minus 2. As we can see, these parts are the same, so we write them together with x minus 2. And this is what's left over, so we write this together as 3x minus 2. And that's how you do any of the factoring problems. They'll all kind of look like that. Let's do the next example. Okay, so let's say they now want to find the intersection between this and this. If I want to find the intersection between these two things, what I would end up doing is I would set them equal to each other. So I would have 2x plus 3 is equal to x squared plus 4x minus 5. We'll then move everything to one side to help ourselves out. So I'm going to get rid of the negative 2, and I'm going to get rid of the negative 3. It's going to give me 0 equals x squared plus 2x minus 8. We are then going to use this, and we're going to factor this out. We could use other methods like quadratic formula or a whole bunch of other things, but factoring is always probably the easiest. So I'm going to have x minus or plus 4 and x minus 2, because 4 times negative 2 gives me negative 8, and 4 plus negative 2 gives me 2, and that equals 0. So I know my x values would be negative 4 and 2. And now I need to find my y values. You'd find your y values by plugging them both back into that original equation, which that original equation you can see is 2x plus 3. So if you plug in negative 4, you get negative 8 plus 3, which is negative 5. Oops. And then if you plugged in 2, you get 4 plus 3, which is 7. And this would be my answer. Okay, let's do one last problem. Let's say you were given these 3 points and you needed to write a quadratic equation. Now normally we write it in vertex form if we're given a graph, but if we're giving points, we want to write in standard form, which is y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Well then, what we could do is we could plug x in for these x's. We could do it a second time with this x in for these x's. And we could do it a third time with this x for these x's. So when we do this, we could really make a matrix that is 1, 1, 1, 4, 2, 1, and 9, 3, 1. Because 2 squared is 4 and 3 squared is 9. With this being the variables we want to find, and that would equal all of our y values, which our y values would be 4, 3, and 6. So we'd say that's going to be 4, 3, and 6. Again, how you'd solve this is you take the inverse of this matrix and multiply it by the inverse of that matrix on our graphing calculator, which you can plug into the matrix spot. I'm actually not going to plug all this into this video, but you can go back and watch past videos where I plug all that in. Or you could ask for help today on trying to plug it in. Try the different problems.